wireless is 10
It is 6:02, there being a quorum present, we'll call the meeting to order. With a roll, we'll start with Emil over there on the right.
Emil Dahlquist here.
Dave Wanger, present.
Jack Lawrence present.
Kristen Kasner, present.
Dana Alera, present.
Kristen Piper. Kristen
Kristen Piper. Yep, Kristen Piper, present.
Ah, good, thank you. Okay.
You gotta give me a couple of minutes, guys. I'm struggling to find the stuff that I thought I did.
We are honored to have Jim Reardon with us this evening, who's just completed his tour of Hamilton, nooks and crannies.
Do you guys want to give an update on town meeting and the survey going out and how many we have back?
I'm embarrassed to say I did not get a count, and I meant to bring them with me. They're in the back of my car, which unfortunately I don't have because my wife has got it. So as I stole her car, she took mine for collateral. And so I've got to find out, but I've turned over the initial 64 surveys, completed surveys, to Jim to take back with him, and I will get the remainder from town meeting all to him as well. I read through a number of them last night. There's a clear theme to them. There's no interest in building a ice rink. And it seems to be a broad interest in trying to get the taxes under control, with the understanding that probably commercial revenue sources, if they could be expanded, would go a long way toward achieving that objective, and that regionalization seems to be an acceptable alternative, as well as a way of perhaps getting a larger base to spread our costs of operation here in the town. So that, and there's, I would say also that there's a distinct interest in maintaining open space and the character of the town as it is now. People, it appears, do like the town the way it is, and have no interest in turning it into something else, in which I have to say I concur. So that's the impression to date, and we'll see what the Survey Monkey has to say.
And Jim, you said at the last time we spoke, you had about 125 online surveys?
Yeah, about that.
Have you really?
Yeah,
Plus this 64?
yeah. Plus whatever else, you said there was another pile
So that's
of them.
about 190 plus what we got at town meeting, so that's not bad at all.
This is Kristen, would a reminder on the Facebook groups be helpful? I couldn't remember what we set for the deadline. I thought we said about a month. So I'm happy to do another call and see if we can get a few more, but that's a great start.
Wasn't it the 18th that we were going to keep it open?
I think we were going to keep it open we're going to do like the last week of April, reminder, like 1 week left, and probably close it that first week of May, unless you guys think differently.
That's good.
Okay, I can do a reminder sometime next week then.
Yeah, that sounds great. People, school vacation week only.
Rick?
A couple areas
Greetings.
of the population.
How about the 25th then, when everyone's getting back?
Awesome.
Okay.
All right, sorry about
All
the
right.
delay. Yep, I figured out what I did.
I wish I could with my new computer.
I didn't miss anything.
All right. Nope. Before I lose these things, I better put them away. And then I will get us started. All right, so we have our presentation for the evening, which includes most of the materials. We also have Eric
Halverson.
Halverson with us. online, and so that's great too. And first I'm going to go over the agenda. So, like we did last time around, we thought that it helped out a bit. We included timing on the agenda, and we're going to try and stick approximately to the
Just,
timing.
Lauren Lynch says she's on the Zoom, but she's still waiting to be let in.
Oh,
Hold on.
are you hosting? Patrick hosting?
No, I am. Right. So, a couple of people actually, and Chris Hurlick as well.
Who's in them?
Chris Hurlick, he's from RKG with Eric.
Oh, I may just note, Jim did come this afternoon at 4 o'clock, and we did a quick tour of Hamilton so that he'd have a feel for the character of the town. We went out of town to have a look at biolabs, and came back through to survey the nature of the different parts of Hamilton, including Asbury Street and the Tobacco area, Tobacco Road area, the old dump with its photovoltaic array and so forth. And so I think as a familiarization for Jim, I think hopefully it has improved.
It was definitely
augmented.
helpful. I thank you very much. It was much appreciated, and thank you, Kristen and Emil, for showing me around. It's excellent. All right.
We just were along for the ride. Jack was the storyteller.
All right. So anyway, so we got the agenda up now. You guys all have the agenda sent around to you as well. This is a little less detailed version of it, just kind of a summary, but it does give the timing and roughly what we're planning on this evening. So we have the opening and agenda, which, you know, is set for 5 minutes. Project status report, the housing and existing conditions, which Eric will be doing for us. Then we'll review the comments that we've received so far in Google Docs or on the Google Drive. Comments to the land use and to the services and facilities write-ups, so those existing conditions write-ups. Pardon me. We'll do an action workshop where we talk through actions that we might like to include for those particular sections that I just mentioned. Confirm the next meeting and agenda. The next meeting date will be the 28th. And at 6 o'clock, of course. And then we've set aside 10 minutes for committee business as well. Does that sound okay to everybody? I don't want to jump ahead without giving people an opportunity to comment on the agenda. All right. All sounds good.
Here it is.
No, it doesn't want to advance for some reason. There we go. All right, so we have the status report, which I'll send around with the meeting notes. I just wanted to do kind of a quick review of that. The main thing that has changed since the last status report was the updated draft chapters, which are posted to the Google Drive. So we have the land use and shouldn't say economic development. That's gonna get posted, but it isn't ready yet. The land use section and services and facilities, those are the ones that we provided for comment. We now have, in addition to those, ready for your review, natural resources, cultural resources, and historic. and then transportation. And so if you guys look, those are all up on the Google Drive. In addition to that, there are also several sets of meeting minutes. There were more coming. The most recent ones are for March 10th, so we put those up. I haven't done the March 24th ones yet, but they'll be coming, roughly at the same time that I do these. So that's it. That's basically it with the status. You know, already mentioned where things stand with the survey, which, you know, that was also intended to be part of the status report. Any questions about status? Okay. All right, so the next thing we have going here is Eric and Chris will do existing conditions for housing. I think Eric's going to be the primary presenter, and Chris is along too.
Jim, can we back up, just in terms of the review sequence that we talked about? Did you mention that? It just,
Actually, I don't think I did yet. Hold on.
and we can table it till the end. We talked about how, when, kind of the expectation of when we get something, the time for review, what we're gonna update the spreadsheet.
Yeah, no, well,
How do we get in a groove?
yeah, exactly. No, well, Eric is getting his presentation up and ready. I'll do that. Let me see. Eric, good to see you this evening.
There he is.
Hello, everyone. Patrick, could you allow me to share my screen?
Oh, I think that's my job now, right? Patrick, I might need a little bit of your help with doing that. I don't usually run Zoom meetings. Oh, here? If I do that, this will allow him to share? Yeah. Okay. All right. And then what do I do next?
Hit share.
Okay. Eric, you should be able to share now.
Nope, not yet. It says the host disabled participant screen sharing.
Back in.
I think you have to
And,
stop share first. Are you sharing now?
Do I have to stop?
Yeah, you have
Yeah,
to stop
you-
sharing for him to share.
All right.
Go back in the corner.
Here?
And, yeah, make him co-host.
Okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
So I'll kind of fill in as you get ready. But we talked about, as they're gonna put elements on the Google Drive, we'll have X amount of time to review them. We put the comment matrix spreadsheet on the Google Drive as well to comment into that. I don't remember exactly the time frame, but that sequence of getting something out, commenting in the matrix, and then at that next meeting or a subsequent meeting, taking kind of those comments and review to kind of iron out the recommendations that we want to be crafting.
Yeah.
And kind of get in that sequence of element, review, then get together, talk about those comments that are especially substantive comments, not just grammatical comments, and then kind of work as a team to figure out what that means and if we agree or disagree with those recommendations moving forward.
Yeah, that's basically it. So the first in the series is presentation. So Eric is doing a presentation on housing. So we don't have the housing section up on the Google Drive yet, but we will soon. We'll do that after, a couple of weeks after he does his presentation. You guys will have the housing section to review, to make comments on, like Kristen was just saying. And then we'll take those comments, and then the meeting following that, we'll go over action items, because, what Eric is presenting now is really existing conditions, not necessarily actions. That's something we want to develop with you, so,
Okay.
yeah.
And how about land use, since we've all commented on that?
Yep, so we're doing action items on that tonight. That and services and facilities.
Okay, when we get to that, I have a question.
Okay, cool. All right, so Eric, I think you're up.
Okay, y'all can see the presentation?
Yep.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Hoping to run through this in that allotted period of time, maybe a half hour or so. A lot of the presentation material at the beginning hopefully will be a refresher for many of you if you took part in the 2019 housing production plan. Although we've updated the data points from that 2019 HPP document, the story sort of remains, I think, the same, if not has gotten a little more dramatic over that period of time since that plan was released. So hopefully the first half of the presentation will kind of just be a refresher for you, and we can go through it fairly quickly. If there's questions, Jack or Kristen, just let me know along the way since I can't see anybody. Okay, so just the beginning will be a little bit about demographics, and I like to start with demographics of the community because that kind of sets the stage for housing. Population, households, education, income, race and ethnicity, those are all things that end up factoring into people's housing choices and really what they can end up affording, whether they're renting or they're owning, what they can end up affording in the community itself. So I like to just start with this as a backdrop so you can get a sense of what's been happening. So in terms of population, Hamilton's total population has been declining since its peak of about just over 8,300 residents in the year 2000 from the 2000 census. And that's actually different in many of the slides you'll see, or if you looked at the pre-material, hopefully you saw, we tried to compare Hamilton to Essex County as a whole, just to give you a sense of, how the trends are maybe in Hamilton are either the same or different from the county. And in this case of population, they are different than the county. Essex County continues to grow, while Hamilton has been declining in population over the last 20 years. The latest census from 2020, we do have the population counts. That's about almost all we have at this point. It's dropped to just over 7,500, 7,561 over that period of time. We took projections also from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and we also compared them to the UMass Donahue Institute's projections. They do projections for every municipality in the state of Massachusetts. UMDI's projections are a bit outdated at this point, so we used MAPC's, and their projections continue to show Hamilton's population declining through the year 2030 to about 7,276. When we look at the population by age, this probably may not be surprising to all of you, but Hamilton's population, its residents continue to grow older as a whole. The median age of the resident population in Hamilton increased between 2010 and 2019. It went from just under 39 years of age to over 41 years of age. And just by way of talking about the age cohorts, so the different age groups in town, the age group, between 60 and 74, and those over the age of 75 saw the most growth over that period. Just in terms of a percent change, 60 to 74 saw about a 35% change, and 75 and over saw about a 36% change. Pretty high. Although I will say the 60 to 74 was actually a little bit lower than the county, but the 75 and over was substantially higher than the county. Children under the age of 5 continued to decline. The population between the age of 20 and 44, sort of your young college graduates, your young professionals, folks in the workforce, and also those who are entering the kind of key years of family formation, those are declining in Hamilton. You can see that's different than Essex County, particularly for 20 to 34-year-olds, where that number is going up. In terms of just population distribution by race and ethnicity, Hamilton's population has become less diverse between 2010 and 2019. The number of residents, or the percentage of residents who identified as white alone, actually increased. And I think in 2019, that number was at 91% of all residents in Hamilton identify as white alone. That does differ from the county, from the state, and from much of the country, where the population, particularly close into urban centers like Boston, are diversifying. This slide talks about household income. So on the left, you see how the households in Hamilton, how their incomes are distributed across those different income bands. We again compare it to Essex County here on the left and the right. So you can see just how many more, in terms of percentages, how many more households in Hamilton there are that are earning over $150,000 a year compared to the county. You can see just how large that becomes when you look at Hamilton households that earn at or above $200,000 a year. And those numbers continue to increase. The graphic on the right-hand side of the screen shows the change in household income distribution between 2010 and 2019. And you can see the percent growth of households between 150,000 and just under 200,000 grew by almost 6%. Those over 200,000 increased by over 14%. So that's pretty high. In terms of households by income, by age, so this is sort of looking at three different data metrics in one. Here we just want to take a look at where are those highest income households in terms of the age composition. So you can see those households that are earning over $150,000 a year tend to be in the sort of middle age category, the 45 to 64. And I thought it was interesting to present the 65 plus as well, because you can see they do actually comprise a pretty fair share of those households that are earning less than $50,000 a year. Now, I do caveat that by saying sometimes the income representation of retired householders is a little bit skewed because they may be on a fixed income, whether it be Social Security or 401k distributions or annuities, whatever it might be, that could potentially lower their incomes or at least show a lower income compared to households that are active in the workforce and earning whatever it is, $150,000, $200,000 a year. But just to give you a sense of sort of where the incomes are by age as we're thinking about housing needs and housing prices, particularly for whether we're targeting senior households, family households, single person households. I think it's good to see this. And then we just look at education. There are usually pretty strong correlations between educational attainment and household income. And I think Hamilton probably bears that out pretty well. In Hamilton, in 2019, about 71% of residents had a bachelor's degree or higher. That's those that are over the age of 25 years. And in Essex County, just to put it in perspective, that number in 2019 was 40%. So the educational attainment of Hamilton residents that are over the age of 25 is substantially higher than that of Essex County. And I think, again, that correlates with the household income figures that we see. And if you remember back to when we talked about economic development a couple months ago, and we talked about where Hamilton residents tend to work and what industry sectors they are represented in, it was a lot in that kind of professional, scientific industry sector, and a lot of them were traveling outside of Hamilton for those jobs, likely representing higher paying jobs. So that's just a really quick overview of kind of the demographics to sort of set the stage before we talk about households and housing units. Jim brought up a good point the other day, just to add some definitions in. I'm not going to go over all these. I think you all had this in advance, but I just wanted to provide some definitions of, like, when we talk about household, what is a household? So that's all the people that occupy an actual housing unit, regardless of whether they're related or they're unrelated. Then what is a householder? So that's the individual whose name the home is in. And then we'll talk about family households, so people who are related, living together either by birth, marriage, adoption, or blood. Non-family households, again, those who are not living together or are living together who are unrelated or comprise a single person household. And then just some definitions on housing units. So what is a housing unit? What's an occupied unit? So that's referring to a place that is actually occupied by people, or what is a vacant unit, and we'll talk about vacancy a little bit more in the presentation, but just something you could refer back to as you're going through the deck, or when you go through the chapter to make your comments. When that's ready, you'll have some commonly used terms. These are also in the housing production plan, which is a great resource too. So as we switch to talk from demographics to households, from 2010 to 2019, the total number of households actually increased by about 8% to 2,719 households in Hamilton. The graphic on the left shows the distribution of those households by household size. So from one-person households on the left to 7 or more person households on the right. And you can then see how that distribution looks compared to Essex County. And, you know, probably not surprising to you all, the household sizes in Hamilton are quite a bit bigger than Essex County. And there are actually a lot fewer, by percentage standards, a lot fewer single person households. There are a lot more family sized households in Hamilton. I think a lot of that has to do with the size of the units and the the composition of the units, which we'll talk about, where there's just a tremendous amount of single family and large single family homes in Hamilton compared to a lot of other communities in Essex County that may have other types of housing that might be attractive to smaller households. And then on the right-hand side, just looking specifically at Hamilton, we see the change in household size between 2010 and 2019. Households of all sizes, just with the exception of 4-person and 7+ person, increased between 2010 and 2019, with 3-person households growing the most. The 3-person households could be a result of one or two things. It could be a 2-person family household who maybe had a dependent, or it could be a 4-person household who had a child move out or move away for college or something like that. So it could represent a growth, or it could represent a decline in household size, but the 3-person is fairly common. And as we look, then shifting gears to look at household composition, so this is where the family and non-family household definition comes into play. So really between 2010 and 2019, Hamilton's household composition didn't really change that much. Just over 71% of all households are comprised of married couple family households. And then about 9%, 8 or 9% or so are single parent households where there is no spouse present. So it could be a male head householder or a female head householder. The one change that we did see, which we see in many communities that we work in, is an increased share of householders that are living alone, particularly in communities where the aging population is growing, like Hamilton. It may at one point have been a family household of 2 people living together and maybe one spouse passed away, and now you have a single person living alone in that housing unit, which is fairly common, and we're seeing that, not that exact trend, but a trend in increased numbers and percentages of householders who are living alone. So as we start to think about the aging population in Hamilton and what types of housing people might want or might need, particularly those who might be living alone in a very large home, for example, do they have a desire to move out of that home and move into a smaller unit? Doesn't have to be a multifamily rental, but it could be just a smaller unit in general. So maybe something to think about with the goals and strategies as we go forward. So shifting gears from households to actual housing units, so the actual unit in which a household would reside. We see from 2010 to 2015, there was actually a pretty big jump in the number of housing units in the town, growing by just almost 300 exactly. And then in 2019, that number came down just a little bit. I would say that doesn't necessarily mean that there was a loss in housing units, as these are running 5-year estimates from the census. So it is within the margin of error that number could be about the same. But I think the more important trend is over the last 9 or 10 years, the total number of housing units, the unit count, actually increased over that period of time to being just under about 3,000 housing units by 2019. As I mentioned before, we'll talk a little bit about vacancy. This is pretty interesting. at the end, I'd love your thoughts on this as folks who live in the community. But on the left, you see the housing vacancy rate. This is for all types of housing, owner and renter. It doesn't segregate by tenure in the graphic on the left. But you can see every year between 2010 and 2019 sort of how vacancy has been changing in Hamilton versus Essex County. Essex County has been on a downward trend, going from about 7% down to about 6%. Hamilton's been sort of was on an upward trend starting in about 2013 to a high of about 10% in 2017. That number starting to come down by 2019. I suspect with the craziness in the housing market between 2020 and where we are today, that vacancy number's probably come down even further. On the right-hand side, we break housing vacancy down into the types of vacancy that the Census Bureau tracks. So Essex County is shown on the left, Hamilton shown on the right of that bar chart. And it's really interesting. I didn't really expect to see this in Hamilton. Maybe I just didn't know the community well enough when I was looking at the data, but the number of seasonal vacant units, so those are units where when they conduct the census, it is not the person or household's primary residence for the majority of the year. That's how they define seasonal or recreational or occasional use. That number in Hamilton was 32%, which I thought was pretty high. I thought it would be lower, and there's nothing wrong with that. I just expected it maybe to be lower. And really interestingly, the for sale only number, when you look at Essex County, about 9%, Hamilton was about 27.5%. Which I thought was pretty interesting. I don't know if that is maybe attributed, and again, this is all pre-pandemic. It's also a sort of 5-year estimate between 2015 and 2019. If maybe in Hamilton it just takes longer for a house to be off the market to actually sell, just because of the price points and the size of the homes. Maybe it just takes a little bit longer. I'm guessing when we see new census trends over the following couple of years, I'm guessing that those percentages will, again, probably come down quite a bit. But just thought it was kind of interesting to point out. In terms of housing tenure, so the breakdown between owner and renter units in the community, Hamilton, again, is shown on the right, Essex County is shown on the left. About 81% of all occupied housing in Hamilton is owner-occupied, and about 19% is renter-occupied. When we compare that to Essex County, that number is 64% for owners and 36% for renters. So again, Hamilton, in terms of its housing stock, is definitely is well represented or overrepresented by owner-occupied units with fewer rental units. And interestingly, since 2010, that number of rental units has actually come down over that period of time. It was about 24% of all units of all occupied units in 2010, dropped to about 19%. And while owner-occupied units have actually increased over the 2010 to 2019 period. Just looking at how those housing units are distributed by the type of structure that they're in. So probably not surprisingly, about 85% of all housing units in Hamilton, whether they're occupied or vacant, are comprised of single-family detached housing. That compares to about 51% of all housing in Essex County. So Hamilton is substantially higher than what the county has. And then when you look at the other structure types for housing, Hamilton doesn't really have as many one-unit attached. That would be like a townhouse, for example. 2-unit duplexes, triple deckers, fourplexes, buildings with 5 or more units. You start to see a little bit more representation. And then as we go bigger, buildings with 20 or more units, it's about 6 to 7% of Hamilton's total housing stock. So a relatively small number compared to single family, which if you've lived in the community or like Jim have driven the community today, it's probably not surprising. Just shifting gears, talking about age and pricing of homes and units. Hamilton actually has a pretty high percentage of homes that were constructed prior to 1940, about 27%, 28%. And you can see as we go further into the sort of newer homes, so say those that were built in 2000 or later, that percentage continues to decline, just showing that the number of housing units that have been constructed, say, since like 1970 has continued to decline decade after decade after decade. And here we are, you can see how small the percentage gets for those units that were built after 2014. On the right-hand side, we wanted to show a little bit about median home sale price. So this information does go to the end of 2021, capturing about a year and a half of pandemic home sales. So here the blue line on the graph represents all homes that were sold. The red line represents condominium sales. The yellow line represents Essex County all homes. So just to give you a sense of where Hamilton's housing stock in terms of sales stands, was just under, at the close of 2021, it's at about $780,000. Just 2 years ago in 2019, that median sale price was $598,000. So it's increased just under $200,000 in 2 years, and that's the median. And we compare that to Essex County. Again, in Essex County, there's been an upward trend since 2009, but you can see that the sort of delta on the graph between the blue line and the yellow line, there's still quite a bit of a gap there. So, you know, not surprisingly, Hamilton's housing prices are quite high, which again, I think, you know, matches with the income changes that we reviewed in the demographic section as well. Just shifting gears, talk a little bit about rental housing. So the chart on the left is specific to renter units. Again, pretty interesting from a renter perspective. There are a lot of renter homes, about 37%, that are in single-family detached homes, and you can see how that compares to Essex County, which is maybe about 8%. So Hamilton definitely has a pretty high percentage of rental units that are in single-family homes. And then, not surprisingly, what we commonly see, another really high percentage, just over 30%, in units in buildings that have between 20 and 49 units, which is pretty common. As we get to the larger scale development, the 50 or more unit structures, then you can see it really flip-flops. Essex County's percentages come up and Hamilton's percentages are pretty low. Again, there's just not that many large-scale rental buildings in Hamilton compared to a lot of other cities and towns across Essex County. Just sort of zooming out to the North Shore and kind of Merrimack Valley submarket area, we thought it'd be interesting just to show two quick trends. On the left, you see trends in apartment vacancy, so in rental apartment vacancy rate for that submarket, going back as far as 2010, coming as forward as the first quarter of 2021. You can just see like how much that vacancy rate has come down over that 2-year period, hovering at about 4.5%, which is very low for rental apartments. And then you can see the number of occupied apartment units in that submarket have continued to go up. So even as vacancy comes down and pricing has gone up, we still continue to build units. Certainly nowhere near the number of units that we probably need to stabilize the market, but it's an interesting trend. And then just talking a little bit about rent pricing. So we looked at the distribution of gross rents. This is from the 2019 census data, the 5-year estimates. You can just see, again, Hamilton compared to Essex County and where the distribution of rental units lies in Hamilton versus the county. Again, Hamilton's rental units are highly concentrated, just over 60% in the price range of $1,000 to just under $1,500 a month. That's where the bulk of them are. And then interestingly, compared to Essex County, as you start to get into the higher priced rents, so those over $1,500 a month, Hamilton actually has a much lower share. So kind of unlike what we see with the owner-occupied pricing, so the for-sale house pricing, the rental pricing seems to be a bit more on the affordable side in Hamilton. And again, I think that's probably resulting of sort of two things. One is there's just not that many rental units in Hamilton. and there aren't that many rental units that have been built, so sort of newer units. Most of them are probably 40, 50 plus years old at this point. So that probably correlates to the pricing that those companies or landlords can actually charge, compared to the owner-occupied housing stock in Hamilton that I think is very large, it's very nice, it's very well maintained, so it's commanding those very high sale prices. Just a couple more slides left, and then we'll be finished. Just looking at cost burdening. So cost burdening is defined by HUD as any household that's spending more than 30% of their household income on housing costs. So that could be rent, it could be mortgage, taxes, insurance. So in Hamilton, much like we see in a lot of other places, renter households tend to be far more cost burdened. So there's a much higher percentage of renter households spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs than there are owner households. That's not unique to Hamilton at all. But what I thought was pretty striking was between 2010 and 2019, the sort of jump in housing cost burden renter households, which is shown on the left in those blue bars. Back in 2010, about 45, 46% of Hamilton renter households were considered cost burdened. If we fast forward to 2019, it's about 68%. So again, it's not a large number of households, it's about 250 households. But the percentage increase I thought was fairly substantial. I don't have an idea of what that's attributed to, but thought it was worth noting as we're thinking about affordability challenges, particularly for renter households. And then on the right, we show Hamilton's housing cost burden for owner households. And here, this is just specific to Hamilton, but broken out between those households that have a mortgage and those that don't have a mortgage. And you can see the change there as well as the number of households. I think 2 slides left. I just wanted to share really quickly, in case you weren't aware or hadn't seen this in the housing production plan. So the Chapter 40B subsidized housing inventory that's kept by DHCD. This is as of December 21st, 2020. Hamilton had a total, they're using 2010 housing units. They haven't updated the SHI count for 2020 yet, at least not that I've seen. So I think they're still using 2010 housing numbers. The town was at 2,783 total housing units. There were 86 subsidized affordable units on the subsidized housing inventory. When you put 86 over 2,783, it results in affordable housing percentage of 3.1%. When I was looking at the 2020 housing unit numbers, the housing units have gone up, and I think the subsidized units came down by 2. I think it was 84. So that results in a slightly lower percentage actually over that period of time, but I'm still waiting for the new SHI numbers to come out from DHCD. But still, according to Chapter 40B, the town should be aiming for 10% or greater or be subject to 40B developments. You're at 3.1%, so there is still a pretty big delta there. And then lastly, I don't know how much we want to talk about this. I know the town's already been fairly proactive in terms of the multifamily zoning for MBTA communities by submitting the comment letter to the DHCD. I reviewed that, but I felt like I'd be remiss if I didn't at least mention that this was out there. Hamilton's unit minimum, according to the guidelines, would be 750 units as a commuter rail community. Again, there's nothing holding Hamilton to doing this, but it does just be worth noting. I know the town submitted the comment letter. The final guidelines, so how this is all going to shake out, are expected to be issued, I think, in June of 2022, so in about 2.5 months. And I just wanted to bring it up, whether the town ends up acting on this or not. I think it's worth just considering this as part of the master plan at some point, because whatever the town decides to do, it will have some impacts on housing, land use decisions, transportation and infrastructure, facilities and services, maybe even on economic development. So, as we're thinking about goals and as Jim mentioned earlier, the sort of action items or action steps and strategies, I just felt this was it was worth mentioning and just sort of continuing to have this maybe as part of the discussion as we go forward. Okay, I think that's it.
And before we move on to the next item, we'd like to open it up for questions.
Eric, this is Dave Wanger. Hello.
Hi.
A couple of questions. How do you correlate household size and household units are up, but population is down? I'm having difficulty correlating those.
Bless you.
Isn't it?
So the, excuse me, with the decrease in population, it doesn't always result in a decline in households because the household size is changing. It's getting smaller. So you can have declining population and more households if households are splitting, or if the single person households that we saw increasing are sort of moving into the community. You could potentially be replacing a household of 2, 3, 4 people with a household of 1 person, for example. So there could be correlations like that.
I thought household size was up also.
I think household size had actually decreased between 2010 and 2019. Just going back. Yeah, it shrank slightly. It went from 2.91 to 2.89. And I think a lot of that was the result of those 7 or more person household shrinking.
All right, I'm still confused by that. You indicated that a state agency had projected that Hamilton population would continue to decline going forward.
Yep.
Did they surmise, do they have any explanation for that projection?
I'm guessing that is sort of a trend's extended. I know with MAPC, there's a lot of different factors that go into their population and employment projections. I'm not going to pretend to know them all, but some of that is based on the trends that have been happening over the last several censuses, which since 2000, the population has been on the decline. So I'm guessing that probably plays a large part in their projection out for the next 10 years.
Okay, so that leads to another question. Do you have any conjecture as to why we're bucking the trend in the county and our population is declining? Any explanation come to mind?
My gut tells me it's because the population continues to get older. And also, if you have a number of married couple households with, say, several children, so 2, 3 kids, and as the householders continue to age and the children leave the house, that could be resulting in some of that decline. I also think it could possibly be as people get older, say, I don't know how old, but say as they continue to get older on the far end of the age spectrum, you may have some of those residents having to leave the community to find the type of housing unit they're looking for, assisted living, more care. Maybe they're moving in with their children or other family members outside of Hamilton, or maybe some of them are just passing away from old age.
2 more questions. I apologize for monopolizing.
Okay.
The number of housing units was based upon 2010 data. Like was the 86 40B units, is that a more recent figure or is that also dated?
So I believe the 86 is as of December 21st, 2020, so just a few months ago.
Okay. And finally, do you draw, given your expertise in terms of fiscal issues, what do you conclude from all this in terms of fiscal matters?
say, just based on fiscal, nothing else, the extremely high increases in the median sale price, I imagine, will result in a favorable revaluation. And again, not from what the residents are going to pay in taxes. So I don't want to go on record saying that's a good thing. But just in terms of the money collected from the town, I imagine that reval of those homes that are selling and the drastic increase in the prices would probably result in more property taxes on the residential side.
But do you have any immediate recommendations for us regarding our fiscal health and what to do about it?
Nope, that's coming next.
So if I could jump in and follow up on that. So the conclusion, and this is what I'd like to see actually included in this, is some key summary bullet points. So Hamilton's getting whiter, richer, and older. Question I have is, can the median family income support the median median price of a home in Hamilton? That's sort of a key question, and I think that gets to the point of why we have a declining population, because there's housing becomes more and more expensive, and young families can't afford to move into this town. So we're getting older, we're getting, housing prices are going up because we have a lack of housing being developed, and the younger replacement generation can't afford to live here. So those are the kinds of summary conclusions I would think that you would want to pull out of this data and present to the reader.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great point. When we pull the chapter together, we'll have those kinds of things in there. Thank you.
Yeah, because I think this gets to David's point is, I know you were looking at it and trying to conjecture at a granular level, but I think we need to come up 5,000 feet and look at this and say, if we have a decreasing population and we're not building new housing, the burden is going to increasingly fall on those of us who remain in town, even though the valuation's going up, so is the tax rate. And we have an infrastructure that's aging, and the cost of that infrastructure is going to fall on a either stagnant or shrinking population. So I think there's some critical trends here that should be thought about, discussed, brought about.
I
agree.
If I may, we at one point we conjectured that much of the population shift reduction here was due to Gordon Conwell, and that many of those who formerly lived here to attend Gordon Conwell, either in their dormitories or elsewhere in town, and there was certainly conventional wisdom in this town at one point that there were a lot of Gordon Conwell matriculates that were living in marginal housing in basements and barn apartments and things of that nature because they were studying, and that was their principal thing that they were doing. I think there are two other things that happen. If a family is living here and their children graduate from the high school and they don't sell the house and the children move away to go to college and then subsequently somewhere else, now you've got a very different household there. You've got a declining population, but it doesn't make much difference. On the other hand, if they do move away and a retiring couple who've done very well decide that they like that house, they're going to move into the house, and the taxes aren't going to make much difference to them. We've gone through a tremendous fluctuation in the population over the last couple of years, and the nature of the population could have changed fairly drastically. I mean, if you don't have to commute into Boston anymore, you have a very different cost structure in your family than you ever had before. And that could be a reason for buying a better house. You don't have to pay to go into Boston anymore. And because that's someplace you're going to work right out of your house, instead of trying to go into an office and pay for a train or for a car or for whatever else that it would normally take to get you to that office. I think it's very difficult to conjecture any sort of trends at the moment, given how unstable the last 2 years, 3 years have been. I don't know that there are any real lessons that we could take from this that would be useful necessarily. Maybe that's just a bad attitude on my part, but.
No, Jack, if I could jump in and piggyback off of that. I mean, I had the same thinking, and I know there's a comment made in the chat as well. I mean, I recognize this is a challenge of utilizing data that ends in 2019, and I don't know necessarily, like, it's just a hard time to be making these types of analyses because so much has changed in the past 3 years. And like from my personal experience, observations in my neighborhood, like obviously there has been a huge surge of younger families making that shift out of the city for the exact reasons that Jack mentioned. And so I don't know, beyond, analyzing the kind of changes in the housing market, increases in housing prices, number of houses being sold year on year, like what other supplemental data you're able to integrate in beyond census, because I recognize that it's a limitation. Like there's just not good large scale data for these past 3 years.
Yep. It is a problem we are facing in every project right now. Everybody is asking the same question, and we just don't have the information.
Actually, you can go back to the housing production report that was concluded in 2019, and most of the figures that you cite actually are mirrored in that report. So the trends then are unlikely to have changed. The mode of work, whether it's at another location or at home, is kind of, it doesn't really impact the population or the economics. The marginal savings from not transiting to abutting communities is pretty small, and overall, it's not going to impact the trends that are going on. I mean, these we've seen in population, and help me here, Dana. School population has been dropping for the last 10 years, dropped 15%.
It's definitely declined. I don't know the percent off the top of my head, but yes, school population has declined.
Right.
But could I push back against that for a second? Just because I think, and this is a personal anecdote, but the people that I know, and myself included, I think everything that happened expedited our shift out of the city. My child is not yet in the school population, but will be. And I know a lot of people who are in that position who kind of jumped out of the city earlier. And so I think that trend, I do think it is relevant to the demographic changes that we're seeing in town.
And I will jump in on that, is that school-wise, we do have what we call a bubble at first grade and income. We anticipate a bubble again at incoming kindergarten. So that supports a little bit what Lauren, typically the schools typically look at 6 classrooms across each grade level, and we have 7 at first grade and anticipate at kindergarten. So.
And didn't that bubble start earlier in Wenham?
That I don't. You mean where did they put it? It doesn't necessarily mean it's in Wenham. In other words, are you saying whether the classroom was put at Bucher or
the percentage was moving? That Wenham took up because they had more people, and then it started to go.
And again, it's actually, and COVID plays into it. It's very complicated. It's not just a matter of how many children there are. It's also how many children attend the public schools. And COVID had a big impact on there were a lot of factors, but obviously some of them are financial, about who makes the decision during the past 2 years to put their children in private school. So some of that is
Yeah, that's
cost.
another shift, yeah.
Correct.
And somebody coming out of the city and suddenly, figuring that it's a lot safer to live out here than it is in Boston, are selling extremely expensive units in the city. So relatively speaking, we're an attractive market. It's hard to believe the numbers that we're just looking at, but I think there is that there's more cash out there to put into this kind of thing. And certainly anecdotally, the street I live on is shifted to a much younger group of people.
This is Kristen. I just wanted to jump in and see, maybe this is a question for Eric, but whether or not adjusting the survey or doing a new survey or utilizing a future public meeting is an opportunity to sort of confirm and or deny some of the data that we're seeing because of the major shifts in the last couple of years. If that's an opportunity that maybe you're seeing other projects do, or if it's just take it with a grain of salt and add some anecdotes and move on. I'm just trying to think, I think we all anecdotally agree with what Lauren is saying. I know I am in the same boat. And so is that just what we do and we move forward with the plan, or is there benefit to, again, having some more like quote unquote data?
So Kristen, can I just add in before Eric answers? Because I think it's a really good point. There's so much that's changed in the last 2 years. We don't have that hard data. But I mean, I wonder if we can, through these different elements that are absolutely going to be affected by kind of the COVID effect over the last couple of years, if we at least should highlight the question, like, trends are showing X, that might be something that we should be looking at in Hamilton. Just so, we're reading this at whatever point in time, but, oh yeah, that was something we were thinking about, and it was something that we should be considering when making decisions. That we don't have that hard data on it. Kristen, I think it's a great idea to try to get as much as we can kind of qualitative stories and data if we can't get those hard data points throughout the process and questions that we ask the public. Over the last 2 years, what has changed in your kind of life? And I mean, I know everyone else is saying it, but I will say also that my street and neighborhood is also getting a lot younger, and it's great to see. It's great to see so many baby strollers everywhere. But there definitely are, and I know school with kindergarten, first grade, I mean, what grade do you put your kid in at what age after COVID is definitely was a struggle. So anyway, Eric, I'll let you, I have one more question, but I'll answer that first.
Yeah, we can certainly incorporate into the chapter what Kristen was saying about, kind of COVID trends and maybe considerations. In some communities, we have been supplementing. I mean, I'll just tell you what we're doing in other places. I'm not going to put words in Jim's mouth about what to do for Hamilton, but in other places, we've been supplementing on housing-specific studies with surveys. We're about to launch one for Portsmouth, New Hampshire. We're doing a project for the Public Housing Authority there, where we're going to have a survey, and in that survey, it asks a lot of questions about movement during COVID. Did you sell your home, move to a house here, rent a house here? Where do you work? Where do you live? Those kinds of things to get better information through the survey to back up quite frankly, just the lack of recent data. So we are doing that.
One of the other data points that I think would be really interesting, but I don't know that we'll ever get, is the reasoning why the folks that are migrating out of the community are actually doing so, because they're creating that void that's allowing for those young families to be able to buy a place or have a place and do the family rearing that we're now seeing. I live in a community north of here, and we're seeing the same thing there. Yet at the same time, our population is fairly stagnant.
I mean, one thing we could do, and I think this might have been in the survey anyways, is ask if you are considering leaving Hamilton. Why are you considering leaving?
Yeah, most of the answers I saw was taxes, cost of living.
Right, which gets back to the basic point is we're in a spiral, and I think if watching the cycle over the last 20 years, sure, my neighborhood has gotten younger because all the former residents that were my friends have left town. They're gone. They've moved to other communities because the quality of life or the pricing, or they were moving with family or friends. But we're still faced with the population is changing in age, but it's not growing substantially. So we're faced with the issue of we have either stagnant or slightly declining population. We're not increasing our taxable housing base, and so this gets to the financing, and this is where I'm hoping Eric will get into some implications over time is what is going to be that impact to the community over the long run? Are we just going to get more and more expensive housing that people can't afford or don't want to afford or don't want to pay taxes on and are going to leave? So that's my biggest concern is you look at the trends, we're getting older and older and older, but we're not attracting, at least in trend-wise, and maybe it's changed over the last couple of years, there's a bubble, we're not attracting and keeping young families over time. So we've got a very heavily weighted white, rich, old people town, and it's out of balance, it's out of whack, and it's not a prescription for a healthy town culturally, economically, or in any other criteria that you can think about.
But I'm a little concerned about these data points being somewhat not determinative. Rick, you talk about are people not being able to afford to move in, and then we have repetitive anecdotal evidence that young families are in fact increasing on this street, on that street, on that street, plus the bubble. So again, I'm having trouble correlating all this. And I really would look to you, Eric, as the expert, to give us some guidance as to what you conclude from all this. And I forgot what you said when I asked you initially. You said the recommendations or your conclusions will be forthcoming. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, what we try to do at the end of each of, at least for our chapters, is to have sort of an issues and opportunities section. We'll have some summary bullets up front, but then at the end try to tie together the data and say, and sort of tell the reader, well, what does this mean? What should you be looking out for? What are issues either today or those that might be forthcoming? Many of which, the great suggestions that were made tonight about what some of those probably are. So that'll be in the chapter itself. Just before I forget this point, just thinking about COVID, it's probably a couple things that we may want to think about for the future and future discussions. One, I think someone made the point that people may have been able to sell a home, whether it was a single family or a condo, in a more urban location for a very high value, and then parlay that money, especially if they had a lot of equity in that home, parlay that money into, say, a bigger, more expensive house in a place like Hamilton. So I think that the ability of those households to sell at that time, I think what everybody thought was the top of the market, but it keeps going up, allow them to then make this pretty substantial move out of the city. So I think that's one thing, but I don't know if that's going to keep happening. I don't know if that was like a blip in our sort of housing story, or if that's going to keep happening. I don't know what's going to happen with return to work. I don't know how many Hamilton residents can permanently work from home, or how many of their companies are going to be calling them back to work, and does that then impact not only their household budget in terms of transportation, or maybe even childcare, but also the future determination of where people are going to live versus where they work if we return to the office, either in a hybrid version or a full-time version. The other point I wanted to make too was around housing costs. Interest rates are rising. The Fed says they're likely to hike it another 50 basis points sometime this year. Maybe there'll be another hike after that. We're at about 5 or 5.5% now. So I don't think that's necessarily going to drive housing prices down, to be honest, because I think we'll be in a lot of trouble if that ends up happening. But I think it's going to make people think twice about how much they can actually afford and where they can afford to live. So just sort of something in the short to medium term to kind of be thinking about is like, what is the more global economics, how is that potentially going to impact a very high cost of housing community like Hamilton?
That's it's a really interesting point, because the 30-odd units of housing that have come on the market here in Hamilton, as they've turned over, have gone up, up, up. And the question is that because there was more cash chasing that limited supply, or was it because people saw the obvious point that interest rates were going to go up, which would normally have the impact of driving the house price down? So they decided that the first loss, best loss, let's go grab the house, and then, at least I've got a tangible asset, because I'm not going to earn much on my cash until interest rates really do go up a long way, and they've got a long way to go because they're at zero now. It just goes back to the point of how unstable the situation has been, and how many, it's the old figures don't lie, but liars can figure. And
yes, I mean, maybe there's an opportunity to think about, as we go through this process, to think about the trends that we do feel fairly confident in. The fact that the community continues to get more expensive, and honestly more, and also getting older, and the ability to find a starter home, or the ability to find just something that's affordable to what you make if you're not making $150,000 a year. Like, those trends seem to be consistent, and I think the pandemic's made those trends worse, not better, or not even stable. I think they've just made them worse. So maybe there are things in which we can agree upon as a group, or you can agree upon as a group, that are things you may want to tackle. Like, do older residents in Hamilton, are they looking for an opportunity to downsize, and can they even find that? If the answer to the first question of do they want to do that is yes, and the answer to the second is no, then maybe that's an opportunity to address housing in the, as part of the master plan. So maybe there's like kind of a couple of things that we could find that don't necessarily rely on having data from 2021 or 2022, that we all feel comfortable saying, yeah, maybe this is an opportunity to address something that has been a trend for a long time and looks like it might continue.
It's a very interesting point, Eric, because there are several communities in Hamilton that predate zoning, that are very small lot, small house, where I don't think the prices have gone up very much. Or there are other impediments to the price going up, such as Asbury Grove, where you don't own the land under your house. So I think there's still affordable housing. Whether it's turning over or not is a different matter, because where would you go? But I think there are communities, here in this town, on some of these small lots with older houses and so forth, that have not boomed in price, and would still be considered in the affordable category, that may diversify the possibilities. Because I'm back to the instability.
Yeah, well, I think
So I'm sort of keeping an eye on time,
Yeah.
and this is a very interesting discussion. And I don't want to necessarily cut it off if you guys want to keep going with it. but-
Jim, I just have one question
Yeah,
on this. For Eric. Eric, this is Emil Dahlquist. Curious about one data that seems to be missing is how transient the population is, and at what age group would that occur? We know in your data that what the population is currently at what age. But I'm curious about if that would be a variable that would have some value to understanding actually the trend. What age group is sort of moving through the town? Is the average stay 2 years, 3 years? And what part of the population is shifting more than another?
I know we can get geographic mobility data from the ACS. Again, it'll be pre-pandemic. I have to check. I think they have that data by age cohort. I'll have to check on that. But I'll make a note of it.
I just want to make one comment of the data that was presented. So we roughly have 2,955 housing units. You mentioned that 19% of that, excuse me, was rental, and then 37% of the rentals were single-family rentals. And then the rental average is $1,000 to $1,499. So if you look at that, that means we have 208 plus or minus single-family homes that are rented between $1,000 and $1,400 and $1,500 a month, which in my opinion is a lot of housing stock that's actually really affordable in the community.
That's not accurate. That's not the way the market really is.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say. Like, that's what was presented.
Right.
And I guess I'd like to dive into that a little bit more too, because I think it's a really important point. If that actually is that we have this stock of actually fairly affordable single-family homes for rental, I don't know. I just wanted to
No, I
see
think
that and
I think
then
that's a very good
try
point.
to
That's a very good point.
confirm that, I guess, because.
Let me just give you some anecdotal information. I own a rental property, and a one-bedroom is going for $1,600, and it's 900 square feet
In Hamilton?
in Hamilton.
Right, so where,
And the rents at Willow Flats are going to be, for an affordable one-bedroom unit, are going to be $1,800?
right, that's why that data point, I was like, really?
It doesn't make any sense.
Like, if that is true, like, we should embrace that in terms of the thing, so I don't know.
I think there are housing units also on old estates that, people may be living in at a very artificially low rental rate because they offer sweat
Talking
equity.
about single-family homes, the subset of single-family homes going for $1,500, which is ridiculous. They're going for $2,500, $3,000, $3,500.
Right, well, and that's why I'm just calling it out, because
Right. Oh, absolutely.
if it is a fact, we should talk more about it. And I just want to dig a little further into it to see that, I guess.
I also just wanted to throw out there, I find it very interesting that since the data is showing that older households tend to show lower incomes and sort of those income disparities that we have, it's interesting the prioritization in this area of 55 and over housing that is going for what, in the 700s, 800s. I mean, it's incredibly expensive in my personal opinion. Who can afford to move into those units? The data would show certainly not current Hamilton residents. So I think that's an interesting thing to dig into a little bit more too. Should that be the priority? Why is that the priority?
Okay.
And I'm just thinking about, we don't know what we don't know. Like, there might be a reason that we don't know for, we just don't know what we don't know. Like, we could come up with reasons like, maybe those are families that are renting to family members, like, in other words, there are lots of wealthy families in Hamilton, maybe. So we just don't know what we don't know, but that's an important,
Right, well, that's why I want to kind of
Yeah.
dig into it a little bit more to.
yeah.
And it'd also be interesting to see housing burden by age group. You had housing burden, but, our young people buying these huge houses and having a huge house cost, I mean, they might be paying for $700,000 house and still make a lot, but it's still a $700,000 house. To just understand, I mean, obviously, I think we can
That's what I
some of
put.
those
That's
back.
exactly what I put in the chat, Kristen, was like,
Oh,
a
sorry, I
personal
can't see the
anecdote
chat
was,
in
you
the-
know, like,
in here.
my husband and I pay, you know, we stretch our budget on housing way more than we probably should and is smart so that we could live in Hamilton. And so I suspect that other young families, especially those who live downtown, are probably doing a similar thing.
Thanks, Kristen.
Again, really great discussion. Seems like maybe we've come to a little bit of a stopping point here. I think next steps might be, I know, Eric, you're working on finalizing the draft of the chapter, and then we'll get that posted, give you guys an opportunity to review it, and then talk through some action items for that. Kind of like Krista mentioned earlier with the sequence that we're going to try and use now to get to complete chapters. Thank you very much, Eric. It was really incredibly interesting.
Yes, great. Thanks everyone for the feedback and suggestions. I was taking notes on the side about just things to follow up on or interesting things that we could add. So appreciate the feedback. Jim, I'm gonna sign off unless you need me for something else.
No, please feel free.
Okay.
Thank you again, and you too, Chris. Bring the presentation back up. Every now and then this thing does something that I'm not really quite sure how to fix. That goes up there. All right, so we're at about 7:25, and here I'm actually going to bring up the agenda because I think we want to maybe make some decisions about what we want to do next and how to handle things.
So are we going to look at land use or the comments from land use?
Yeah, so that's the next item on the agenda, roughly speaking. So, so we just got done, of course, with item 3, which was the existing housing conditions. And the next items that we have are going through the Google Doc comments or the Google Drive comments. So that would include land use and facilities and services. I think we should do that, definitely. And then we have some time scheduled in here for the, the action workshop or developing actions. We could potentially just abbreviate that a little bit and then save a little bit of time at the end to confirm, the next meeting time and agenda topics and what the homework will be. Does that sound okay to everybody?
Yeah, and I think we want to be out of here by 8 o'clock. That's good for everybody.
That's appreciated.
Yeah.
We're going to have
Let's
to
aim
be,
for that.
we're going to have to be very efficient.
Right, so that's why I was raising this now. So I think one of the things that I'm thinking of as far as like the action workshop part goes is that we'll get through as much of that as we can. And then maybe what we'll do is post what we've gotten so far to the Google Drive. And I'd ask, as an additional homework thing, that you folks try and fill in.
Yeah, that's good.
All right.
I got to figure out on my new computer how to get there.
All right. Well, we can talk about that a bit too if you want.
Oh, my God.
All right, so let me bring up the comments that we have on the matrix so far. So we, oops, that's yours, Rick. Or what you sent me. Actually, I thought I had the list of, there it is. There we go. All right, so I received or saw comments from Rick and Dana and Emil on the facilities and services and land use in general,
What a
I'm just gonna
surprise.
summarize these, and then if you guys want to, we can go through more specifics. I think Emil might have had an item that he'd like to talk about a little bit. If I can put you on the spot, Emil.
Gold star for the three of you. I'm embarrassed to say I haven't put the comments in yet.
And I couldn't, Rick, did you do it? Did you do it I didn't see your.
Rick's comments weren't in that matrix, but Rick sent me.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to I was just like, I didn't see that. Okay. Yep.
So I wanted to mention that we got some new materials up on the Google Drive. I just put them on. And so now there is, it says economic development. I haven't put that one up there yet. That one's coming. Patrick, I'm going to send you the economic development chapter pretty shortly. And then after that, we'll post that as a draft as well. But now we have land use, we have natural resources, cultural resources and historic, community services and facilities and transportation. And of course, the implementation plan and action. And actions. So I wanted to point out a couple of kind of key highlights or, general highlights from what I've seen so far. So folks are noting typos and graphical edits and things like that that they would like in the documents. And those are always very much appreciated. After you look at those things for a while, you start to miss stuff that might be obvious to other people. So that's very much appreciated. Some more, meatier comments, I guess. Some of the information in the existing conditions, people describe this in a couple of ways, but I chose the word is minimally explained and needs a little bit of a clearer thread. So there was this basic idea that people would like to see a theme to the data that's presented.
I have to have a browser. What's a
And
browser?
as much as possible, we try and organize the existing conditions so that it gives some sort of a theme, but those themes will really develop more as we get into the action planning. Because we'll have something that we're moving towards. So I wanted to let you know that and assure you that that's coming. It's not clear what the reader is supposed to take away in some cases from reading some of the land use tables or information in general. Same basic answer to that. As we start to pull this stuff together more and get your comments, we'll start to build that in. We'll start to build more of a thread and a theme. Some questions came up about what topics are covered in each section. And so what I was thinking to do with that is at the beginning of each one of the sections, just kind of lay out specifically what's going to be in there. It might actually do sort of an index page that I put up on the Google Drive as well that has each of the topic areas and what subtopics will be covered in each, so that somebody who's just looking at a single section to make comments on it knows where other stuff is supposed to be coming in. Then Dana, I think it was you who sent me some, or was planning on sending me some new information about the school. That came up in one of the comments, I think. A study or something?
I think I sent it to you, but if you didn't get it, yeah, that was just a facilities. We had just recently, I believe in February, gotten a pretty extensive internal facilities update, and I hope I sent it to you. I thought I did, so I can.
You may very well.
Okay, I can resend if you need me to.
Yeah.
Send it to the group? Did you send it to the group?
I did not, but I can if
I'd
you
just
want.
be
Yep,
interested.
Yep. Yeah, it was just Tom Geary, who's our facilities director, presented it to the school committee, I want to say in February. So.
So these are the more specific comments that I'm showing up there now. Again, a lot of this is, I guess I'd say editorial comments or typos, changing things around so graphically they work a little bit better and stuff like that. I'm figuring as opposed to going over those individually, that we just kind of do the general review that I just did. And I don't know if anybody has anything else that they'd like to bring up at this point. That'd be great. How are you guys, basically finding the Excel table to be a good approach to doing this? Okay, good.
It's fine, and I think you captured my comment is the need for context. As a reader, I'm getting a lot of data points, but I have no context. I have no, why am I reading this? What am I supposed to get out of this? You know, it's great that you've got the data, but it doesn't draw a picture. It needs to draw a picture. Why is this important? And what is the picture that you're trying to paint, as opposed to giving me data points that I'm supposed to interpret and come to a conclusion?
Yeah.
That's what I want you to do.
Yep. Yep.
Good, bad, or ugly, or indifferent.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of the process. I think in your email, you said something to the effect of, you know, I know it's early in the process, and sort of anticipating that this will be coming, and
I think,
that is the intent.
but that smacks of school solution, and I think what we want to do is have a multiplicity of interpretations, which will stimulate thinking all the way around. I'm not really in favor of having Weston and Sampson impose an analysis on the process. I think that's something that really ought to come out of this committee from discussion, rather than imposed from on
Jack,
high.
I'm not proposing that. What I'm asking him to do is use the data to draw a picture so that people who are reading it have a context, not like I'm getting data points. Remember, the report is not for the committee, it's for the community. The community is going to give it a cursory review of maybe several hundred people in town. They're not going to be steeped in the history of the town as you are or other people are. So they need to pick this up. This document needs to zero in, tell them what they're, it's like when you give a speech, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. I mean, that's what you're trying to get them, is to focus in on, why am I reading this? What in this document is important? It's not changing the facts, it's just giving them some context.
Well, I think it's important to highlight what Eric, like certain things Eric highlighted when he was comparing Hamilton to Essex County, or this is a data point. Is it one that everybody has the exact same data point? Is it a unique data point?
Right.
When you're putting it together, like, wow, that's something we should look at. I mean, when we're just looking at it, we don't know if it's the same as Beverly or different. And so I think when you're looking at that analysis, to just at least highlight, this is an interesting piece we should explore more about in Hamilton. And just so as you guys look at all these other towns, is this something that's important or not? I mean, early on we had that kind of, I don't know, what was it, like air pollution or something? I don't even know, but it was like, oh, well, that's the same thing for every community in all of eastern United States. Okay, well, we're not gonna talk about it then if it's the same, because we can't change that. But there are things that are kind of more unique that we do have some control and power to understand, and, whether good, then let's continue doing it. Bad, let's maybe not do it anymore. And to Emil's point of kind of, protect, preserve, and grow, like where does it fall into? Like why is this piece, this thing important or not, and try to connect the dots as we come up with the, not recommendations, but the action items.
I think the other thing that bothers me is that something that may be relevant for Beverly or for Portsmouth, which have populations that are, five times or more ours, we've got a very small population here, and so small trends are going to have much greater effects as we go along. So that's where I think its committee is to bring things into perspective, is the important part of what we have here.
Yeah,
That's-
well, and I think that's what Rick is saying, like, let's just pull it out to what we really should be talking about, I think.
Right. For example, I asked for Eric, all that data that he presented about incomes and median cost of housing, the summary question I want to know is, can the median household income, I don't know what he said that number is, it's probably 125,000 now or more, afford the median priced house in Hamilton? That's what I want. These are summary, it's like take the information and saying, okay, what does that mean? Because the average person, you're going, well, you're throwing like all this stuff at me, what am I supposed to do with it? And what's the impact? And what's an actionable item that I can take from that? Well, if somebody tells me that the median family income in Hamilton can't afford the median priced house in Hamilton, well, I think there's a problem there. So what should we be thinking about? What are the options we can be thinking about to deal with that issue? That's what this conversation should yield.
I think if the housing inventory generally remains unsold, then the market is telling us that kind of stuff. I mean,
No.
if stuff is turning over, I mean.
No, you're mixing apples and oranges here. I'm looking at the entire town and I'm saying, okay, median price of a house in Hamilton is X, and the median income of the family in Hamilton is Y. Can they actually afford to buy a house? It gives you a picture of, for the people that live in town, median income, could they afford the house?
Right.
That they're
You're
living
getting at the affordability of the town.
You're getting into the affordability.
Well, and that's
But
where
they're
some
living
of the
here,
cost
right?
burden,
Yeah, I mean, the
cost
burden.
burden graph will help us understand.
Right. And we know 30% of the houses in the town are cost burdened, and most of those are in rental units, was my takeaway, but I could be incorrect.
I don't know. I think that it's all becomes ultimately totally subjective. I mean.
No,
We've learned
it's not subjective. That's why we're getting an independent, objective consultant to come in and give us data, best data they have, and said, listen, this is where you are, this is where you're headed, here are the options for you to take action to do something different. That's the whole point of this master plan from my perspective. It's not about being subjective. It's creating a database, best available information, independent, objective information, because that's the biggest problem. Everybody has their own subjective vision of where the town is going based on their family, their income group, their social group, whatever, their education, and we're trying to get a collective picture here of, okay, where are we and what do we look like? At least that's my impression. Maybe I'm completely off base.
I'm a bit concerned that I remain confused in terms of some of the questions and some of Eric's answers in terms of where these data points in the aggregate take us. And I'm not sure if the conclusions themselves are going to be subjective and surmise and guesswork. I'm concerned about a reliance on data points as objective determiners.
Well, you at least create a foundation from which you can then conjecture. We're not working in a perfect world where you get black and white data that says, okay, that tells us we should do X. You're going, well, best available information is giving us trends, and it's telling us the picture kind of looks like this. And we can,
And you generally mix that in with anecdotal information.
right.
And again, this is where it's really important to get all of your input. Then you talk with people who live in the situation and who understand hopefully where the community has been and maybe where it wants to go, and come up with responses to the data that you have and the anecdotes that you have to keep things moving in a favorable direction. whatever that is. I mean,
And I think, but I think to have that, broader conversation, and to Emil, your point in organizing the document and the conversation, and I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit now, of just kind of these larger ideas that are a little bit just easier to digest when we have this conversation, kind of publicly. I'm kind of throwing it over to you if you wanted to talk a little bit more about that, but, because I think it is, I think organizing in a way of just kind of these three categories is, it's a more organic conversation, I think, in terms of, the character of the community and what we want to grow, what we want to protect, and just having those broader categories.
I think we as a committee need to be very careful in terms of what we take from the data points and what we conclude. I'm concerned that there's so much subjectivity here that
Right, and I think we get the data point, just like I asked a question about rental housing. That's interesting. What's the next question we ask why is it relevant to here, and where does it fit? But the data is the starting point.
But a lot of the data points now, they're all based on as-is conditions or existing conditions. Am I right, Jim? So we're getting a picture of where the town is right now. Now, how that's used going forward is, in drafting more detailed information in the master plan. That's when we need to get into what is the best one to use. Or you got to narrow all these variables down so that you're only looking at a couple, because you start trying to manipulate something with 8 different variables, you're not going to get very far. So there has to be a way to do a comparison between the various data points. I, for one, am pretty satisfied with all the information there, but the step, as Rick was saying, what are we going to do with it now, in filling out some of the charts and so forth, that's where I think the context becomes more important. And on the context, what I think Kristen was pointing out was the idea to make this, and I don't know if this is the right time to talk about land use, but
coming up next, so go.
The idea was if we could break it down into sort of 3 broad categories and then a what's next category or the future category. We had talked about what to protect, what to provide, and how to grow. Those are the key things in a master plan. Because in the end, I think the master plan is to make the town better. That is the sole purpose of what we're doing. What better means is something that we can bring out in the plan. So, but it isn't economic development only. It's a lot of other things. So the point is to, because everything is related in this town, and all of the different categories, like housing, is related to economic development and related to land use and so forth. All those things are related to each other. That my thought on the land use part of it, you said it was sort of the overarching component in a lot of the elements. I agree with that. It is. But I wonder where's the best place to put it, and the one piece missing for me under what to protect is community character, because I think that actually is a very close fit to land use. My suggestion to the group here is to take that land use category, call it community character, and then insert a future land use map or plan going forward. Because in the end, the land use map is going to take advantage of all our goals, policies, action steps in all of these categories: economic development, housing, whatever. Land use in and of itself is not something the public is going to understand that much about, unless you talk about it in terms of the character of the town, because, as I say, essentially they're the same thing. And that's why I thought putting the emphasis on that. But the big importance for me, by talking about community character, it's going to really influence on how the town is going to grow in the future. If the town decides that it wants to protect community character, then it's easier to define what it is that you want to protect in a town in writing a code. And I think that that's a good strategy going forward. So that section, how do you want to grow, becomes more important, and that's the key for a lot of us here, whether it's economic development or whatever. And I have no answers for any of this at this point, but it is, I think, a way to structure it in a way that's going to be understandable to a lot of people and give the context, which you've been talking about. If you put it under a category like what do we want to protect, community character, you see the connection, or people reading this will see that connection and what they mean and why they want to get their input on that. And it's not that hard to do to start putting that together. Essentially, it's the same as land use. But save the land use to the end because in the end, if you want to make change, it's through the bylaws. That's how it's going to happen only. And that's where you need to kind of focus on land use and bylaw writing.
Just chime in on that one. I'm not sure I would save it to the end, because I think land use, it's the only resource we have. Land in this town is the only resource we have. So the question is, how do we use that resource, right? So I think land use sort of is the founding, the thing that people need to understand at the beginning. Not how we're going to use it, but what do we have now?
Yeah.
What is, and this is I've been beating this drum, and probably until I'm dropped dead, is what do we have left to develop? We still don't have the answer to that question. We know some percentage is already protected permanently. We know some percentage is developed, our homes, our businesses, our institutions, and some is excluded because of environmental reasons. But what is that piece that's left? And I'd love, and a very simple is like, out of the 9,500 acres, how much do we have left? Is it 900 acres that actually could be built on? I mean, that's, because that really then narrows it down into and never mind what the zoning is, it's the potential. Oh, that's not a lot. So then you've got to go, wow, we got some big decisions to make here. Are we going to protect it? Are we going to build it? What are we going to do with it? I think that drives the whole, everything else. And we don't have the answer to that question yet.
And to that point, that allows us to build the assumptions that we follow, that allows us to craft that future master land use plan that dictates those bylaws that follow and put that into actual mechanics.
Absolutely, but I think it comes back to the surveys. I mean, this is why we're doing the surveys. These are the people who cared enough to sit down with a survey and fill it out. So
But they don't know, that will give us some indications, but remember, we're taking a snapshot of the specific questions we're asking, which will help form some opinions and directions. But I think for the board, and I know certainly for the planning board, and I think for the general public, the question is, what is our resource? What resource do we have that we can protect, defend, develop, and how is that going to impact the town financially, educationally, culturally, infrastructure, because it's all going to come from that. It's the blank canvas of where we are going. What do we have left, and what do we want to do with it? So I think that's sort of the key question.
well, but what, as I say, reading, and I didn't read every one of these things, and ultimately we'll get a good glimpse. But generally, as I say, what I came out with from the surveys I did read, which were quite a number, was they like the open space, they like the rural feel. These are the character aspects that I think Amy was referring to, and they feel the taxes are rising inordinately relative to this thing. So,
Good point.
and most of them will say, and did say, we need some kind of commercial development to vary our site, vary our opportunities, and that, you know, to the extent that regionalization can get our costs down, that's kind of that's what they're looking for. We'll sacrifice our little silo by broadening out to a regional approach. That's acceptable to us. Now, it may be that when Jim gets the whole body of what people are presenting in those things, we'll have a much better definition of character. But that's the kind of definition that we should be looking at, a lens that we're looking at, not our opinion necessarily as a group here. It's not, we don't dictate that. Weston and Sampson doesn't dictate that. The people who took the trouble to answer those surveys will provide the guidance that we should see. And then, you know, if we don't like the result, one has to make his own decision.
Yeah, and we'll do the best we can, the information we have, and in the end, we'll come up with recommendations that are the best, based on the best available information, the most thoughtful analysis, and present that, and then various boards and committees will take action, maybe consistent with it, and maybe not, and then the public will decide. And I can tell you from my years of experience in trying to get various things built or changed or enacted in this town, what you get is may be completely different from what you thought the consensus was, depending on the climate, political climate, economic climate, et cetera. So it'll be a roadmap, and it'll be, you know, our best effort, and hopefully it will serve us well.
So I think we are rolling down on time
Yeah,
here.
we're rolling way down on time, and I think
Yeah.
we need to let
Run
Jim
over.
keep going here.
So what I think we're gonna do is along the lines, if you guys agree to this, is along the lines of what I suggested a minute ago, that we'll post this structure up on the Google Drive, and I'll let you guys try and populate this. I'll do one of these for one of these tables for each section that we have, and we'll give that a shot, see if folks have some ideas on how to fill it in. So the basic, I'll just kind of run over it quickly here, which is why I kind of jumped into the middle of the conversation. So on the leftmost side of this implementation plan table, you have actions. And then going from left to right, there is the action lead. So that is the person, typically like a, you know, somebody's position, like DPW director or something like that, or a group of people, again, maybe like the Department of Public Works, that is going to lead the action. And then there are typically other folks who are involved in supporting, and maybe there are other stakeholders too. So folks who aren't actually going to be involved in the action, but they're important to the acceptance of the action going forward. And the idea here is that we populate those columns for each one of the actions. Action type, don't worry about too much. We'll get to that later. But time frame, we're generally looking at a couple of different broad timeframes, because the term of this plan, you know, a master plan is supposed to be for about 10 years. So we're looking short term, medium term, and long term. Short term is, you know, sometime within the next year or two. Medium term would be, you know, from 3 to 5 years, and long term would be 5 years out or further. And then, so that would be the time frame, short, medium, or long. And then labor resources or staff hours that might be necessary in order to undertake the action. That, we can estimate that later. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. This explanation of this table structure is in that draft implementation chapter that's already posted on the Google Drive. So you guys have the information I just gave you verbally. And so what I'd like folks to do is, with each one of these tables, and like I said, I'll do one for each chapter, so there'll be one for land use, there'll be one for services and facilities, there'll be one for each of the other chapters too. Is just to try and go through and begin to populate it. And then what we can do is, at the next meeting, we can review the information that we've gotten, and we can talk about that. Does that sound like maybe a good approach to trying to get this going?
Jim, why delay action type? Or why defer the,
You can fill that in if you want. The only reason was it's a little more, words not coming to me, amorphous? Maybe not quite the right word. But action type is typically something like whether it's a policy, whether it's something that needs to be constructed, physically done. There was another one in there too, and I'm sorry, I'm not looking at the list, but that's also described in the implementation plan write-up.
Jim, is there a way to do this so it's not shared? Because if I were to start writing on this and somebody else does, at the same time or so.
You want me to send you guys out?
Well, I just wondered if it would be better if we could fill it out individually and then send it to you, or.
Can do that.
I'm just wondering, because I think it would be, frankly, from my standpoint, easier than to do it that way. And then, but I think before going to any level of detail, we probably want to sort out as a committee. We have to go over everybody's list and pick out the ones that should be in there and maybe those that shouldn't be based on
So what I
numbers or something.
recommend on that last point, Emil, is for now, we don't worry about, it's kind of like brainstorming. Don't worry about whether it's the best idea in the world or your least favorite idea in the world.
Right.
We'll sort that out later.
Or I could just maybe copy it as a Word document and then send it to
That's
you?
what I was thinking about.
Okay.
Yeah, so
All right.
you can
I'll do it that way.
do that from the Google Drive.
Yeah, okay.
If you want to do that yourself. But if people are, and I don't know whether people would prefer to do it kind of like we're doing the Excel comment sheet where everybody can see everybody's ideas, if you want to post them, or whether you prefer to more do it like Emil was talking about, just kind of do it on your own.
I think it works well in the first case, but I don't think it works so well here. In the first case, if we have a similar comment, like a typo or something, you're not going to say it again. So
Okay.
you can see what's been added already, but this one's a little bit different, I think,
Yeah.
Can you give us a bit of an example of how we should be filling this out? I mean, so we're reading the land use, you're reading services and facilities, we're reading the other. So right now, you're gonna put it up for land use and services and facilities.
Mhm.
So,
Let me give you an example of a facilities and
Sure.
services action. So, and I'm just being very hypothetical
That's
here.
fine.
Maybe you have a bunch of areas in town where flooding occurs when it rains heavily, and maybe it's because some of the culverts are undersized that go underneath the road. And so, you can't do all the culverts all at once. They're expensive to repair and replace. So an action item might be something like, do a study of all the culverts in town, identify the priorities, and that might be something that is led by the DPW director. But it might be supported by the select board, it might be supported by the planning department, and other stakeholders might be, I don't know, there might be neighborhood groups that are interested in that. They're not gonna be involved in the study at all, but they're gonna be very interested in it. Or businesses are located nearby, some of the areas of flooding. The time frame is, it's a study, so that's something you could probably do. You could do it maybe in the next 1 to 2 years. You might prefer that it's more of a medium sort of time frame, sometime in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
And as far as labor resources go, well, you might give a study like that out to a consulting firm, or you might try and have some members of your DPW.
and
do it
what is the action type for that
For
example?
that one, the action type would be a study, but I can't remember, I have to look back.
I'm feeling like, from what my comments and thoughts are on land use and facilities, that my first draft of this is gonna look really different than my last draft of it. So I'm fine with that, and it should be an iterative process, but the questions I have on land use are more, okay, if that's a fact, I have this follow-up question. And then in services, it's a little bit more concrete, because but I don't know, I just, in terms of, okay, that's interesting, should we think regionally about that? I don't know, that's all, it's just,
Yeah,
it's
and
like not a, this is my comment in time, it's, here we go, let's brainstorm, and let's come back together, and maybe we throw out half of it, and then keep some of it, I don't know, it just, if people are okay with that, that's how
Well,
I intend
this gets to a real, I'm a
process.
little bit confused. We're supposed to come up with an implementation plan for recommendations we haven't formulated yet, especially when you get to housing and land use. So my question is, it feels like we're putting the cart before the horse.
Well, so that's why we did the housing presentation this evening, and that's why we did the write-up of the existing conditions for land use and services and facilities, and did those presentations previously. So you guys had some information to base it on. But we're looking for your ideas.
Yeah, but this is just, and again, this is my impression, this is raw data. This is raw data that's been given a minimal context. We just had this very long discussion about housing and what it means and what are we supposed to do with this information. And now filling out an implementation plan before we've actually even seen any preliminary recommendations from you as a consultant or conclusions that this committee has drawn from further discussion. It seems like we're trying to fill in a graph when we don't have anything to fill in. I mean, maybe for facilities where it's very clear cut, but I don't feel like we've come to any conclusions about housing or land use or implementing bylaws or how. So
I almost feel like the first round is kind of, what do we need to know to think about a recommendation, and where do we think that might go? And then talk through it, and then the second round or however many rounds we go. But, I mean, it's so raw right now, because it's, okay, so this is interesting. What do we do with that? And what else do I need to know? And then come up with it, which is fine, and it's a good practice to
So,
work through that.
I'm sorry to jump in, but I think, because I think at one point, Jim, you had recommended that we do an exercise where we did it together, and the group didn't want to do that at that time. I myself I know, and I did okay with going through and reading the existing, giving my comments, but I don't have the faintest idea. I can, it was interesting that Emil was like, oh yeah, I'm ready to do this, and I'm gonna write a whole bunch of things, and I've got all plan. I don't have any idea what I would put as an action step, because this is very new to me. I haven't, like, your example was helpful in some ways about the culverts, but I would have absolutely no idea how to write down, oh, I know that a study on culverts would probably take about a year. Like, I don't have that background knowledge.
Why don't we do them all at once? Yeah.
So don't feel like you have to fill in the whole table.
No. What I was getting back to is, I am absolutely willing to give it a go and use it as a brainstorming session, and that we put it all out there, and we're an accepting group, and people could say, well, Dana, that was an interesting action step, but actually that's just not gonna work, or that's not viable. That's fine with me if that's the way we're using this.
I just feel like it's way too early in the process. We haven't had a time to digest it. We haven't taken this to the public. We haven't got any recommendations from our consultant, and we're asked to put together an implementation plan, and I'm going, for what?
So Rick, I'm not asking you to put together like a full-blown entire implementation plan. I'm asking to get your ideas on sorts of actions. And if you don't have anything that you want to add in, that's fine.
Okay.
But
So
I think some folks in the group do.
well, and so I guess what I was asking is what we're doing now sort of similar to what you had suggested earlier, which is basically it's an exercise to go through, and it makes us really think about, like,
That's right.
like right now I just said, oh, I have no idea on the land use, but maybe when I get home and really dig in and say what action, maybe I will have some ideas, and maybe I'll put them up there. And the exercise, instead of us generating the ideas in the group, the exercise more is bringing the ideas back to the group and going through them and saying, isn't it interesting that several people talked about something similar, and do we all have, like,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
basically an exercise that will move us forward, but it's not that we're creating a final.
No,
Right.
we're
Because
just
I hear,
focusing.
I guess I'm just trying to,
in this group, what I hear is a lot of people with a lot of interesting ideas about various topics that should be incorporated in one way, shape, or form into a master plan. And that there's a struggle to do that because there's kind of not like a common language and common ground in doing that. And this sort of exercise starts to move you in that direction.
Which I agree with that, but I think, I mean, my first draft is probably gonna be a lot of questions, like,
That's fine too.
if this is true, what does that mean for X? I mean, which isn't an implementation strategy, but it's a follow-up question to get there, so if that's okay.
That is absolutely okay.
Yeah, this is, the one thing that would be helpful is to actually identify what you mean by goal, because my understanding is there's going to be one goal for land use, right? And then it's almost like building a tree. So the most important thing is the goal. Then you get below that, and you start to branch out into, was it strategies or policy? It should be a strategy next, and then the policies. How do you get to that strategy? So you could almost, and then you get to action steps. So you're like building a tree.
So I tend to do it the other way around
Yeah.
because I find it much easier to think about sort of the more detailed things first. Because there are certain problems I look at and I go like, well, I know how to solve that piece of it.
So
but I
then you
don't
have to
know how
categorize
solve this
everything.
big thing.
Okay. All right.
Right. And so as I start to put the pieces together,
Yet.
now the policy comes out, or
That's the
the goal,
problem.
or whatever.
How do you define an
We-
action?
We can
plan?
revisit it, though, I think. I think it's a good start. So it's going to look awful, I think, from all of us, but,
Be fearless.
yeah.
Honestly, I think it's premature and it's really not a good use of people's time. Because we haven't defined the problem and we haven't defined a solution yet. And it's like asking a group of people, some of which who serve in elected positions or appointed positions that have definite opinions and understand a process, and another group of people, and I think it's the majority of people who are not involved and don't know the process, and you're asking them to tell you how to implement and solve a problem we have not defined yet. I just, it's not,
Yeah.
I'm missing something here.
okay, but I get, like, I just expressed how I was feeling about it. At the same time, I said this last time, Jim does this for a living, and you've brought this to other groups doing, I'm correct, doing master planning, and you've done this in a similar kind of order.
Yeah, I'm gonna say to you that.
So we
back
can't
in-
be that different than,
Well,
Back in
I'm gonna
November,
I'm gonna
we started
speak-
visioning
I'm going to speak from experience. I went through a master plan,
lay people.
and I actually have implemented the master plan through the planning board.
Overflow from.
The implementation plan came at the very end, when the public and the whole master plan had decided what the recommendations would be, and the public and the master plan committee had agreed what those recommendations would be, the most logical. And then we actually, the consultant we hired as a separate component to develop an implementation plan customized to the recommendations agreed to by the master plan committee and the public. We had a consensus, we knew what was going on, and that's what you do in implementation plan. I've done this, and to tell me, to ask you to put together an implementation plan for a problem you haven't defined, you don't know who's involved, and you don't know when it's gonna happen, you don't know what the resources are, is beyond me. How do you do that?
I think it's important, though, to look at the existing conditions and at least how individually we're connecting the dots to an issue. Like, so therefore, to try to define the problem.
We don't have the dots yet.
No, but that's my point, like, go through some sort of exercise. We have these existing conditions. If X is true, that's interesting. What does that mean? I mean, I guess that's what I'm trying to say in this process. I agree with you that implementation is really premature, but I do think there is value in some sort of process of how we're thinking about what we're reading to connect the dots.
Yeah, I think that's the value in it, to kind of bring out a way to think about particular problems. We're not, anything that gets written the first time, probably you'll never see daylight. I mean, it's going to be awful.
Right, well,
That's okay. It's okay. It's no big deal. I mean, I think, we're getting late, gentlemen, ladies. I think, I really would like to suggest that the way to go about this is let's just do it. And if it doesn't work, we'll make course corrections.
Yeah.
But let's just start in and do it. That's,
A quick question, if I may, Jim.
Please.
If I said the basic theme is revenue,
Okay.
how does that fit into any of this?
Well, for services and facilities, I would say it's along the lines of how you support the existing infrastructure in town, to make sure you have enough revenue to keep your infrastructure up. So, that's an example, I guess, for services and facilities. For land use, I think it may be more along the lines of what kind of land uses do you want to see brought into town? Maybe in part because they'll lend good revenue.
Right, so,
Makes sense.
so let's stick with that for a quick moment. How does that, good night, how does that fit into this particular
So,
exercise?
so for a land use implementation table like this, it might be the kind of zoning that you want to do in town that encourages the sort of development that you want, that brings in the revenue that you want.
So would that be the action type?
So that action, if you're talking about zoning policy, I would say that's a policy. That's the action type.
but if you just wanted to say, add value to the tax base and then put a couple things underneath that, I think this is kind of our rough draft of thinking. So, okay, this is what I want to do. And just kind of think about some ideas to then bring back to the table for all of us to kind of hash through. Is that a good idea?
Using this format?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, I think it's more of a try to get your ideas out
That's right.
than be perfect with the format.
That's right. Yeah, don't worry too much about the format. The format's there to support, your idea generation.
yep.
Thank you.
And we'll just work through a few and see how it goes. Right?
I think I would feel better, in having the benefit of the data that we get out of the surveys to then address what Rick was mentioning, is that gives us real product. That gives us real problem definition. That gives us real solution mindset that then allows us to more knowledgeably fill this out.
Yeah, we'll continue as we get that, and I can download the survey data that we have and put that on the Google Drive, to your point. But I would also encourage everybody to take a look back at the visioning session that we did back in November. We had, whatever it was, 70 people come in. They gave us all sorts of ideas for actions.
Sure.
And I think that's critical, Patrick, to just we're gonna be informed by all that as we go along here. We'll get better and better at it, I think.
And it allows us to say, this is what we've heard from you folks that live here.
Right.
Not what we sitting around the table were thinking. This is what we got from you.
Yeah.
Here are the tabulations of how many want open space and how we get that and how we pay for that and those kinds of things, as opposed to, the kinds of solution sets that we'll use and employ based on our experience. But, it's almost as if there are two different information sources, ours and the public. I feel better when we have the ability to say to the townspeople, this is what you said.
Yeah.
This
And
is.
we're responding.
Yeah.
We're responding to the best of our ability, and if we've misinterpreted what you've said to us, give us a different milieu to work with, and we'll try to respond to that. But I don't think it's gonna happen like that, because there'll be a multiplicity
Right.
of things, and we're just gonna have to pick up themes to the extent that we can, and then try to be responsive, I think, as we go along.
And then target those themes into data points that allow us to fill this out.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. Okay, I think we're kind of there. Have you got something another item that you want to hit, or
Nope, just-
are we at a good moment?
I think we're at a good moment. Just a reminder that the 28th is the next meeting.
Correct. And people need to read as much as possible of what's in the Google Docs.
That's right.
And comment in the
Those of us who
comment
can't get
matrix,
to Google Docs have to figure out how to do
which I
it.
need to do.
One
And if you
bit
want-
of,
If any of you want, for that matter, but if you want to go over with me, like, how you get into the Google Docs thing, I'll do that with you, I don't know that I can do it now because I'm not sure we have Wi-Fi access, but I'd be happy to
You
do it
do.
with you over the phone or whatever.
Jim, I have an iPad.
Uh-huh.
That's what I use. If you could assist me, I'd be very appreciative.
Yeah, we can do it on like a Teams call one day or something like that. Does that make sense? Do you have the iPad with you by any chance?
No.
Okay, then we could do it either on a phone call or on like a video call, like a Zoom call. I typically use Teams, but I can share, my screen with you and show you how to get to stuff.
Can you set up a time with Patrick so whoever wants to join?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Join,
Be happy to do that.
just like a
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
half an hour, 45 minutes.
a 30-second point regarding committee business. I know Jim has been working hard trying to get meeting minutes put together. What I did want to mention to committee members is that we want to use the Attorney General's guidance regarding how meeting reports are made. It's not going to be transcriptions. It's not going to be word by word by word. It's simply going to be a listing out of the discussion topics, what were the general themes of those topics, and what the votes were. This is the difference between having a 2-page set of minutes for a meeting and a 15-page thing, which will take poor Jim forever.
I would like to make sure they add any tasks that are requests, any requests or tasks. Just,
Action items.
just, yeah, like,
Yeah.
just in the minutes. that
And to the extent.
We
that-
agreed that you would do X and we would do Y. That's all.
Good.
And
That's
to the
good
extent that-
follow-up.
Still has nobody.
There's stuff in there we don't understand, we can always
Nobody-
follow
no
up with Jim
board
and say,
has
you know, what was this all about?
Nobody taking
Yeah.
minutes.
That's awful.
Yeah.
Trusting there won't be that, but I'm just saying that we can
Yeah,
do that.
works for me.
Okay, so, is it time?
It is time.
I'll
You guys
entertain
need
a
to take
motion.
vote.
I'll entertain a motion. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Do we do a roll call vote? We don't need a roll call vote, do we?
Are we on with the others?
Anybody nays? No nays.
It's unanimous.
It's unanimous. Perfect.
To go.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
We get Jim headed south.